Imagine this tonight. We're going on a journey together. A journey through time, through mystery, and through stories that have been whispered for thousands of years. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to stay awake for every word. This story will be here for you, whether you listen with your full attention or let it guide you gently into peaceful sleep. Some of you will hear this entire tale. Others will drift away halfway through and find yourself in the world of dreams. Both are perfectly fine. This story is a companion for your night, not a test. So get comfortable, adjust your pillow, pull up your blanket, let your body sink into your bed. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about something extraordinary. Something that connects ancient temples to modern buildings. Something that links old stories to new discoveries. Something that might explain why certain places feel special, why certain symbols appear again and again throughout history, and why humans have always looked up at the stars wondering if we're truly alone. This is a story about questions. Beautiful, mysterious questions that humanity has asked for thousands of years. Are you ready? Then let our journey begin. Chapter 1. The mysterious book that changed everything. Imagine walking into the largest library you've ever seen. The air smells like old paper and leather. Sunlight streams through tall windows, making dust particles dance in golden beams. Books line the walls from floor to ceiling. Thousands upon thousands of them. Now imagine learning that one book, one specific book, was removed from this library on purpose. Not because it was damaged, not because it was unimportant, but because it was too important. Because the words inside were considered too powerful, too revealing, too dangerous. This isn't just imagination. This really happened. The book is called the Book of Enoch, and for nearly 2,000 years, most people didn't even know it existed. Let me tell you how this book disappeared. Picture the year 325. That's over 1,700 years ago. The Roman Empire stretches across most of the known world. Soldiers march in straight lines. Stone roads connect distant cities. And something new is happening. A new religion called Christianity is growing stronger every day. The Roman Emperor, a man named Constantine, decides to hold a great meeting. Bishops and religious leaders travel from far away. They gather in a city called Nicaea. Today, we call this meeting the Council of Nicaea. On the surface, this meeting was about agreeing on religious teachings, about deciding which ideas were correct and which were not. But something else happened there too. Something that would change history. These leaders looked at all the religious texts that existed. There were many, many books and letters and gospels. Far more than what ended up in the Bible we know today. And they made choices. They decided which books would be included and which would be left out. The Book of Enoch was extremely popular at that time. Early Christian teachers quoted from it constantly. It was considered sacred. It was treated with the same respect as the books that did make it into the Bible. So why was it removed? The Book of Enoch told a different story about the beginning of human history. It explained things that other books didn't explain. It answered questions about where evil came from. It talked about angels in ways that were very specific and very detailed. But here's what made some leaders uncomfortable. The book suggested that humans weren't entirely responsible for all the bad things in the world. It suggested that otherworldly beings had interfered with humanity's development. It suggested that something had gone wrong with creation itself. If you're trying to build a religious organization based on human guilt and the need for salvation, this creates problems. If humans aren't fully responsible for their own fallen state, then the entire structure of sin and redemption becomes complicated. So the book was labeled as Apocrypha. That means interesting, but not divinely inspired. Not quite heretical, but not quite acceptable either. Over the next few centuries, copies of the Book of Enoch slowly disappeared. They were removed from monastery libraries. They were not copied as carefully as other texts. Eventually, most people forgot the book had ever existed, but not everyone forgot. Some groups kept copies hidden. They passed them down secretly through generations. And in some faraway places, particularly in Ethiopia, the book was never forgotten at all. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it as part of their Bible the entire time. Then, in the 1700s, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce traveled to Ethiopia. Among the treasures he brought back to Europe was 3 copies of the Book of Enoch. Scholars were amazed. A lost text had been found again. When they translated it and read it, they discovered something fascinating. This book was mentioned by early Christian writers. Quotes from early church fathers matched the text exactly. This was the real thing, a genuine ancient document that had been deliberately removed from history. What did this book actually say that was so controversial? What secrets did it contain? That's what we're going to explore together tonight. And I promise you, whether you stay awake for all of it or drift into peaceful sleep, these ancient stories will spark your imagination and maybe even appear in your dreams. Let's take a moment here. Breathe deeply. Relax your shoulders. We have all night together, and there's no rush at all. If you're enjoying this journey through ancient mysteries, consider subscribing to this channel. We explore fascinating historical stories and forgotten knowledge. Perfect for learning while you relax or sleep. Now, let's continue our story. Chapter 2. Ancient Secrets Hidden in Plain Sight. Have you ever noticed how certain symbols appear over and over throughout history? The eye in the pyramid, the spiral, the tree of life. These images show up in ancient Egypt, in medieval Europe, in tribal cultures across different continents. Why? What makes humans, separated by oceans and thousands of years, create such similar symbols? The Book of Enoch offers one possible answer, and it's an answer that makes you think. Before we dive into what the book says, let me paint you a picture of the ancient world. Forget everything you see around you right now. No electric lights, no cars, no phones, no internet. Instead, imagine darkness. Real darkness. When the sun sets, the only light comes from fire, from torches, from oil lamps. The night sky isn't washed out by city lights. Instead, stars fill the entire sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a glowing river. Ancient people spent a lot of time looking at those stars. They noticed patterns. They saw that some stars moved while others stayed still. They watched planets trace paths across the sky. They predicted eclipses and seasons. And they told stories about what they saw. Now, most ancient cultures have myths about beings who came from the sky. The Greeks had their titans and gods who descended from Mount Olympus. The Hindus had devas and asuras. The Norse had their Aesir from Asgard. Native American tribes spoke of sky people. These stories are remarkably similar across cultures that supposedly never contacted each other. They all describe powerful beings who taught humans new skills: agriculture, mathematics, metalworking, writing, architecture. The Book of Enoch presents its own version of this universal story. According to the text, there was a group of beings called the Watchers. Their job was to observe humanity from a distance, to watch our development without interfering. Like scientists studying animals in the wild, they were supposed to observe, but not touch. But something went wrong. The book describes how 200 of these Watchers made a collective decision. They descended to Earth. They came down to a specific mountain called Mount Hermon, and they made a pact among themselves. They had become fascinated by humans, not just curious, but obsessed. They saw something in humanity that captivated them. Perhaps it was our emotions. Perhaps it was our creativity. Perhaps it was our potential. Whatever the reason, they decided to break their oath of non-interference. The text is very specific about what happened next. The Watchers chose human women and married them. But the book suggests this wasn't just about love or desire. It was about something deeper, something genetic. The children born from these unions were different. The book calls them Nephilim, which translates roughly to the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. These children were described as giants, but not just physically large. They were extraordinarily intelligent, incredibly strong. They learned faster than normal humans. They lived longer. They were, in every measurable way, superior. Now, whether you believe this literally happened or see it as a metaphorical story, there's something fascinating here. This is one of humanity's oldest attempts to answer a difficult question. Why are some people born with advantages others don't have? Why do some individuals seem to possess extraordinary talents? Why does inequality exist? The story of the Nephilim is, in one sense, an ancient attempt to explain these uncomfortable truths about human differences. But the story doesn't end with their birth. The Book of Enoch describes what these extraordinary beings did with their power, and that's where the story takes a darker turn. The Watchers taught their hybrid children forbidden knowledge. The book lists these teachings very specifically. They taught them warfare and weapon making. They taught them cosmetics and the art of beautification. They taught them sorcery and divination. They taught them astronomy and signs of the earth. In other words, they gave them technology before humanity was ready for it. Think about that concept for a moment. What happens when advanced knowledge is given to those who aren't emotionally or ethically prepared to use it wisely? We can see this in our own time. We invented nuclear weapons before we developed the wisdom to never use them. We created social media before we understood its psychological effects. We developed artificial intelligence before establishing ethical guidelines for its use. The ancient story in the Book of Enoch wrestles with this same problem. Technology without wisdom is dangerous. The Nephilim, with their superior abilities and advanced knowledge, quickly rose to power. They became the rulers of the ancient world. They became the kings and heroes that other cultures remembered as demigods and legendary warriors. But their rule wasn't benevolent. The book describes how they consumed humanity's resources, how they demanded tribute and worship, how they established a world order based on their own superiority and humanity's subjugation. The ancient world, according to this text, wasn't a primitive paradise. It was a sophisticated civilization ruled by a hybrid elite who saw regular humans as lesser beings. Does any of this sound familiar? Does it remind you of any patterns you see in the world today? I'm not suggesting any specific modern parallels. I'm just asking you to think, to wonder, to question. That's what these ancient texts do best. They don't provide simple answers. They ask complicated questions that echo across thousands of years. Take another deep breath. Relax your jaw. Let your tongue rest gently in your mouth. We're going to continue this story, and there's so much more to discover. If you're finding this exploration thought-provoking, let me know in the comments. What do you think about these ancient stories? Do they reflect something true about human nature, even if we don't take them literally? Now, let's talk about what happened next. Chapter 3: The Watchers and Their Forbidden Choice. Every great story has a moment where everything changes. A turning point, a decision that cannot be undone. In the Book of Enoch, that moment happens when the Watchers descend to Mount Hermon. Let me tell you more about this mountain. It's a real place. You can visit it today. It sits on the border between Lebanon and Syria, rising over 9,000 feet above sea level. Snow covers its peak even in summer. In ancient times, it was considered a sacred place. The name Hermon might come from a word meaning forbidden place or devoted thing. Even the name suggests this was a location associated with something that should not be approached lightly. According to the Book of Enoch, this is where the 200 watchers gathered. The text even names some of them. The leader was called Semjaza, though different translations spell it differently. Other names include Azazel, Armaros, Barakel, and others that sound strange to our modern ears. These names weren't chosen randomly. In ancient languages, names carried meaning. Azazel, for instance, might mean scapegoat or entire removal. Barakel might mean lightning of God. Each name tells a small part of the larger story. The Watchers made a binding oath on Mount Hermon. They swore together to go through with their plan. Why did they need this oath? Perhaps because they knew what they were about to do was wrong. Perhaps they feared that some among them might lose courage and back out. So they bound themselves together in mutual guilt. If one fell, all would fall. It was a pact of collective rebellion. Think about what this represents psychologically. How often do groups do things together that no individual would do alone? How does collective action allow people to override their individual consciences? The Watchers descended from the mountain to the valleys where humans lived, and they carried gifts with them: knowledge, secrets, technology that humans had not discovered on their own. One Watcher taught humans metalworking, how to mine ore from the earth, how to heat it and shape it, how to create tools and weapons from bronze and iron. This doesn't sound evil at first. Metalworking was a crucial human advancement. But consider the context. The first metal tools were weapons, swords, spears, knives. The technology of killing became more efficient. Another Watcher taught the use of roots and plants, herbal medicine, healing. Again, this sounds beneficial, but the same knowledge that heals can poison. The line between medicine and toxin is just a matter of dosage. Another taught cosmetics, how to enhance appearance with dyes and makeup, how to create illusions of beauty. This might seem trivial, but think deeper. This is teaching the art of deception. of making the surface appear different from the reality beneath. Another taught astrology and divination, how to read the stars and predict the future, how to use knowledge of celestial movements for power and control over those who don't understand. Each gift came with a shadow side. Each piece of knowledge could be used for good or twisted toward harm. And humans, still young and impulsive, weren't always wise about which way to use these tools. The children born from the unions between Watchers and humans inherited abilities from both parents. From their human mothers, they inherited emotion, passion, and the drive for physical experience. From their otherworldly fathers, they inherited intelligence, strength, and perhaps psychic or mental abilities far beyond normal human capacity. These Nephilim grew rapidly. The text describes them as giants, and while we can debate whether this means physical size or metaphorical greatness, the point is clear. They were not normal. They stood out. They dominated, and they were sterile. This is a crucial detail that's easy to miss. As hybrids, they could not reproduce their own kind. They were evolutionary dead ends, magnificent, powerful, but ultimately unable to create a lasting dynasty through natural means. Perhaps this added to their frustration. They had everything except the ability to create a lasting legacy. They could rule, but they could not build a dynasty that would naturally continue forever. The world under Nephilim rule became stratified. At the top were the hybrid elite. In the middle were those humans who served them willingly, hoping for favor and protection. At the bottom were the masses of ordinary humans who labored to support the entire structure. Does this sound familiar? Hierarchies are as old as civilization itself. The story of the Nephilim might be humanity's way of explaining why these hierarchies exist, why they seem so natural, why they appear in every culture. But the story doesn't justify these hierarchies. It warns about them. The Book of Enoch describes how regular humans began to cry out. Their suffering reached a breaking point, and their cries, the text says, reached heaven itself. The loyalist celestial beings, the Watchers who had not rebelled, heard these cries. They looked down and saw what their rebel brothers had created. They saw the corruption, the violence, the oppression, and they knew something had to be done. A decision was made in the Heavenly Council. This experiment had failed. The contamination of the human genetic line was creating a predator species that would eventually consume all of baseline humanity. The solution they chose was extreme, a complete reset, a planetary cleansing. They would send the flood. Let your breathing slow down now. Feel your body becoming heavier, sinking deeper into comfort. The story continues, but you can listen as deeply or as lightly as you wish. If this story is making you think about power, hierarchy, and human nature, share your thoughts in the comments below. These ancient texts were meant to start conversations, and that's still their purpose today. Let's continue with what happened next. Chapter 4. When Giants Walked Among Us. Every culture on Earth has stories about giants, myths about huge beings who lived before us. The Greeks told stories of titans, the Norse spoke of Jotnar, Celtic legends mentioned the Fomorians, Native American tribes across both continents had giant legends. Why? Why do humans everywhere tell stories about giants? The Book of Enoch offers one answer, but let's also look at the physical evidence that makes people wonder. Throughout history, people have found enormous bones. Before modern paleontology, when someone found a massive femur or skull, they didn't think dinosaur or extinct megafauna. They thought giant. Museums in the 1700s and 1800s often displayed these bones as proof that giants had once walked the earth. Only later did science identify them as belonging to mammoths, mastodons, and other Ice Age creatures. But the stories persisted, because stories carry truth even when the details are wrong. The truth in giant stories might not be about physical size. It might be about power, about the feeling of being small in the presence of something overwhelming. Think about how a child sees adults. Adults are giants to children. They're bigger, stronger, smarter. They make all the rules. They have all the power. A child cannot resist an adult's will. Now imagine a society where some humans are so far advanced beyond others that the gap feels that enormous, where intelligence, strength, and ability create a divide as vast as the divide between child and adult. That's what the Nephilim might represent. Not necessarily physical giants, but beings so superior in capability that regular humans felt like children in their presence. The Book of Enoch describes specific things the Nephilim did with their power. They established kingdoms. Great cities with massive walls, structures so impressive that later generations would look at them and wonder how they were built. Even today, we look at ancient megalithic structures and struggle to explain them. The pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, Baalbek in Lebanon, with its impossibly large foundation stones, Pumapunku in Bolivia with its precisely cut blocks. Modern engineers look at these places and ask, how? How did ancient people cut stones with such precision? How did they move blocks weighing hundreds of tons? How did they align structures with astronomical events so accurately? The mainstream answer is that ancient humans were more clever and capable than we give them credit for. With enough time, effort, and ingenuity, humans can accomplish amazing things. But alternative theories suggest something else. That perhaps humans had help, or that a more advanced civilization existed before the one we know about. The Book of Enoch doesn't specifically mention these building projects, but the themes align. Advanced beings sharing advanced knowledge. Structures that seem beyond the capability of their supposed builders. The Nephilim also established what we might call the first aristocracies, the first hereditary ruling classes, the first systems where power was passed down through family lines based on blood rather than merit. This is where the concept of blue blood might originate. The idea that certain families are inherently superior, that nobility is genetic, that some bloodlines have a natural right to rule others. This belief dominated human civilization for thousands of years. It still echoes today in various forms. But here's what's interesting about the Book of Enoch's perspective. It doesn't present this system as natural or good. It presents it as a corruption, as a deviation from how things were supposed to be. In the original design, according to this text, humans were meant to develop naturally, to evolve our own civilization at our own pace. The introduction of advanced knowledge before we were ready for it created an artificial hierarchy that harmed human development. It's like giving a teenager a credit card with no limit. Yes, they can buy amazing things, but they'll probably make terrible decisions. The power comes before the wisdom to use it well. The Nephilim themselves, according to the text, were not happy. Despite their power and privileges, they were not fulfilled. They fought among themselves. They were consumed by appetites they could never fully satisfy. They lived in a state of constant striving without ever reaching contentment. This is a profound psychological insight embedded in an ancient story. Power doesn't bring happiness. Superiority doesn't bring peace. External advantages don't resolve internal emptiness. The Nephilim had everything except the one thing they really needed: a sense of purpose and connection that transcended their own desires. Meanwhile, regular humans suffered under their rule. But they also learned, they observed, they remembered. And when the Great Change came, when the flood swept away the old world, it was these regular humans who carried forward, the survivors, the ones who had endured. The Book of Enoch suggests that human resilience, human adaptability, human ability to endure suffering, these qualities are actually more valuable than raw power or superior genetics. The meek inherit the earth not because they're better warriors, but because they're better survivors. Take a moment to notice how relaxed your body is becoming. Your mind can wander. You can listen closely, or let these words flow over you like water. Both are perfectly fine. Let me know in the comments. Do you think ancient stories like this one reflect real historical events? Or are they metaphors for human psychology? There's no wrong answer. I'm curious about your perspective. Now, let's talk about the flood itself and what it really meant. Chapter 5. The Great Flood's True Purpose. Every ancient culture has a flood story. This is one of the most universal myths in human history. The Mesopotamians told the story of Utnapishtim. The Greeks had Deucalion and Pyrrha. Hindu texts describe Manu. Chinese legends speak of Gunyu and the Great Flood. Native American tribes from both continents have deluge myths. And of course, the biblical story of Noah's Ark is probably the most famous version in Western culture. Why are these stories so widespread? There are a few possibilities. One possibility is that these stories all stem from real local floods that seemed world-ending to the people who experienced them. Ancient people lived in river valleys. Rivers flood. A catastrophic flood could destroy an entire civilization that existed along one river system. Another possibility is that they remember something bigger. There's geological evidence for a massive flood around the Black Sea about 7,600 years ago. As Ice Age glaciers melted, sea levels rose dramatically. The Mediterranean Sea may have burst through a natural dam and flooded into what was then a lower freshwater lake, creating the Black Sea we know today. This would have been catastrophic for anyone living in that region. Entire civilizations would have been swallowed by rising waters. Survivors would have fled, carrying stories of the Great Deluge with them to new lands. A third possibility, the one the Book of Enoch presents, is that the flood was something else entirely. Not a natural disaster, but a deliberate act. A planetary reset initiated by higher beings who decided the experiment had gone too far wrong. According to the Book of Enoch, the loyal celestial beings looked at what the rebel watchers had created and made a hard decision. The hybrid race could not be allowed to continue. The contamination of the human genetic line had to be reversed, but they faced a problem. How do you eliminate the Nephilim without destroying all of humanity? How do you preserve the original human blueprint while removing the corruption? The answer was the flood, a selective catastrophe that would destroy the physical bodies of the Nephilim while preserving a remnant of uncorrupted humans. Noah and his family, according to this interpretation, weren't chosen randomly. They were chosen because their genetic line was still pure, still uncontaminated by the Nephilim hybridization. This is a very different reading than the traditional one. Traditionally, Noah was chosen because he was righteous, because he was morally good in a corrupt generation. But the Book of Enoch adds another layer. He was also genetically important. His bloodline mattered for reasons beyond just character. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. According to the Book of Enoch, the flood accomplished its main goal. The Nephilim were destroyed, but their legacy wasn't entirely erased. The text hints that the rebel watchers, knowing the flood was coming, took steps to preserve their work. They couldn't save the physical bodies of their hybrid children, but they could save the genetic information. Think of it like backing up data before a computer crashes. The physical hardware might be destroyed, but the software, the code, the information can be preserved and loaded onto new hardware later. The rebel watchers allegedly encoded the Nephilim traits back into the human genome, hidden away in dormant genes, not active, not expressed, but preserved, waiting. This is where the concept of bloodlines becomes central to the story. Certain family lines allegedly carried this dormant genetic legacy. It didn't make them Nephilim, it made them carriers of Nephilim potential. Most of the time, these genes would stay dormant. People carrying them would be normal humans, indistinguishable from anyone else. But occasionally, under certain conditions, some of these traits might express themselves. A person with unusual intelligence, unusual charisma, unusual drive for power, unusual psychic sensitivity. These might be small echoes of the old Nephilim traits surfacing briefly. Now, I want to be very clear. This is mythology. This is ancient storytelling. We should not use stories like this to create categories of superior and inferior humans. That way lies prejudice, discrimination, and horror. But as psychology, as metaphor, there's something interesting here. The idea that humans carry multiple potentials within themselves, that we have both higher and lower natures, that certain traits can be dormant for generations and then suddenly appear. Modern genetics actually supports this last part. Traits can skip multiple generations. A child can have characteristics that weren't obvious in either parent, but were present in a grandparent or great-grandparent. Recessive genes can hide and then re-emerge. The ancient storytellers didn't have the language of genetics, but they understood heredity. They saw that family lines had patterns, that certain traits ran in families. The Book of Enoch uses this observation to tell a larger story about human potential and human danger, about the traits we carry within us that can be used for great good or terrible harm. After the flood, according to the text, the world was given a fresh start. The Nephilim were gone. The Watchers were imprisoned or exiled. Humanity could develop naturally again. But the seeds of the old conflict remained, hidden in the genome, waiting for the right conditions to sprout again. This is where the prophecy element enters the story. The Book of Enoch doesn't just tell a story about the past. It makes predictions about the future. It suggests that there would be a time when these dormant traits would reactivate, when the sleeping genes would wake up, when new Nephilim would appear, not through direct hybrid birth, but through activation of the ancient code hidden in human DNA. Whether you see this as literal prophecy or as metaphor for recurring historical patterns, it's a powerful idea. The same problems humans faced before will come again. The same choices will have to be made again. Breathe slowly. Feel your eyelids growing heavy if they want to close. You're safe. You're comfortable. This story continues, and you can hear it as alertly or as drowsily as feels right for you. What do you think about flood myths? Do they preserve memories of real catastrophes? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's explore these ideas together. Now let's talk about what happened to those hidden bloodlines through history. Chapter 6. Bloodlines that survived the impossible. History is written by the victors. We know this saying well, but there's another truth just as important. History is preserved by the survivors. After the flood, according to the Book of Enoch and related texts, a new human civilization began. We call this period the Bronze Age. Cities rose again, kingdoms formed, writing systems developed, humanity rebuilt. But certain families, certain lineages, seem to hold positions of power again and again throughout history. They became the royal families, the priestly castes, the aristocracies. Now, mainstream history explains this through economics and social structures. Power concentrates. Wealth allows families to maintain advantages across generations. Those who have resources can pass those resources to their children, creating dynasties. This is true, but there's another layer to explore. Throughout history, certain families obsessed over bloodline purity. They kept detailed genealogies. They married within specific lineages. They claimed divine descent or special heritage. The pharaohs of Egypt claimed to be living gods. They practiced brother-sister marriage to keep the bloodline pure. European royalty traced their lines back to legendary heroes and gods. They married cousins to keep the blood concentrated within noble families. Why this obsession with blood? One explanation is simple politics. Claiming divine descent legitimizes power. If you can convince people you're fundamentally different from them, fundamentally chosen, then your right to rule seems natural rather than arbitrary. But another explanation comes from texts like the Book of Enoch. Perhaps these families believed they actually did carry something special in their blood, something inherited from before the flood, a genetic legacy that gave them advantages others didn't have. Now, the Book of Enoch is clear that this legacy is not purely positive. The Nephilim were not heroes in this story. They were tragic figures at best, monsters at worst. So carrying their genetic echo wouldn't be purely beneficial. It might come with strengths, but also with weaknesses. High intelligence, but low empathy. Strong charisma, but unstable emotions. Great drive, but poor moral compass. History is full of brilliant leaders who are also deeply flawed. Rulers who built empires, but destroyed millions of lives. Geniuses who advanced human knowledge, but treated people around them terribly. Were these simply normal human flaws, amplified by power? Or was there sometimes something different in their fundamental nature? I'm not answering this question. I'm asking you to think about it. The Book of Enoch describes how certain families coming from Noah's lineage did carry hidden genetic markers. Most of Noah's descendants were supposedly pure, but one line in particular descended from Noah's grandson Canaan, allegedly carried the dormant Nephilim traits most strongly. This line supposedly became associated with certain ancient cultures. The Canaanites, yes, but also Babylon, Assyria, and other ancient civilizations known for their power and their cruelty. Again, we need to be extremely careful here. These ancient texts should never be used to make prejudicial claims about modern ethnic groups or religions. That's not what we're doing here. We're exploring mythology and symbolism, not making genetic claims about actual people. The symbolic point is that there were supposedly two streams of humanity. One stream focused on spiritual development, community, and living in harmony. The other stream focused on power, domination, and control. These streams weren't purely separated. They mixed and mingled throughout history. But they represented two different approaches to being human, two different sets of values, two different destinies. Secret societies throughout history claim to preserve knowledge of these bloodlines. The Knights Templar supposedly discovered something during their time in Jerusalem. Ancient documents, hidden knowledge about human origins. When they returned to Europe, they became immensely powerful and wealthy before being destroyed by the French king and the Pope. What did they find? What did they know? Freemasons claim lineage going back to the builders of Solomon's temple. They preserve symbols and rituals that supposedly encode ancient knowledge. The all-seeing eye, the pyramid, the square and compass. These symbols appear in ancient cultures worldwide. What do they really mean? What are they trying to preserve? Other groups throughout history made similar claims. The Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, various mystical orders. They claim to possess secret knowledge about human origins and human potential. Mainstream scholars dismiss most of this as fantasy, as invented traditions created to give organizations a sense of mystery and importance. But even if the specific claims are false, the pattern is interesting. Why do humans keep creating these stories? Why do we keep returning to the idea that there's hidden knowledge, hidden bloodlines, hidden powers? Maybe because at some deep level, we sense that we don't know the full truth about ourselves, about where we came from, about what we're capable of becoming. The Book of Enoch taps into this deep uncertainty. It offers one possible answer to these ancient questions. Not the only answer, not necessarily the true answer, but a provocative answer that makes us think. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and into modern times, people have studied these texts looking for clues, looking for patterns, looking for ways to understand human history that go beyond the surface level we're taught in school. And occasionally, something strange would happen. A person would appear who seemed different, who had capabilities far beyond the norm. A genius like Leonardo da Vinci who excelled in art, science, engineering, and seemed to intuitively understand principles that others had to study for years. A leader like Alexander the Great, who conquered most of the known world by age 30. A prophet like Joan of Arc, who heard voices and led armies. Were these simply the far end of the bell curve of normal human variation? Probably yes. That's the rational explanation. But the stories persist. The whispers continue. Maybe, just maybe, something else is occasionally at play. Let your mind wander now. You don't need to analyze everything. Just let these ideas flow through your consciousness like water through a stream. Do you find these historical mysteries interesting? What questions do you have? Drop them in the comments. I love hearing what makes you curious. Let's explore how these ancient ideas connect to more recent history. Chapter 7: Secret Societies and Hidden Powers. Picture a dark room lit by candles. 12 figures sit around a round table wearing robes and masks. They speak in hushed voices about plans that will affect millions of people. They make decisions that will shape the future of nations. This is how many people imagine secret societies. Shadowy organizations controlling world events from behind the scenes. How much of this is real? How much is paranoid fantasy? The truth, as usual, is somewhere in between. Secret societies do exist. Throughout history, there have been organizations that operate in secrecy, that have initiation rituals, that share knowledge only among members. But most of them are far less powerful and far less sinister than conspiracy theories suggest. Many are simply social clubs for wealthy people. Others are fraternal organizations that do charity work. Some preserve esoteric knowledge or practice mystical traditions. However, the idea of secret societies connects to our larger story in interesting ways. If powerful bloodlines really did exist and really did carry special genetic traits, they would need organizations to preserve this knowledge across generations. They would need ways to identify each other, ways to pass down information without making it public. This is where symbolism becomes important. Throughout history, certain symbols appear again and again. The pyramid, the eye, the hexagram, the pentagram, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, the tree of life, the caduceus, 2 snakes around a staff. These symbols show up in ancient Egypt, in medieval alchemy, in Renaissance art, in modern corporate logos and government seals. Why? Are these symbols just aesthetically pleasing, or do they encode information? Some researchers believe these symbols act as a kind of language, a way to communicate complex ideas through simple images. A person who understands the symbolic language can decode meanings that are invisible to uninitiated observers. For example, the pyramid with the eye at the top appears on the American dollar bill. Most people don't think about it. It's just part of the money's design. But symbolically, it might represent hierarchy. The few at the top who see everything, watching over the many below who support the structure. Is this interpretation correct? I don't know. But it's interesting to think about. The Book of Enoch, when it was rediscovered, became very important to certain esoteric traditions. Groups studying mysticism, alchemy, and hidden knowledge saw it as confirmation of their beliefs. They believed the book proved that humans were not alone, that other intelligences had interfered with our development, that we carry within us the legacy of that interference. Some groups saw this as a blessing. Humanity had been upgraded, given gifts that allowed us to progress faster than we would have naturally. We should embrace and develop these gifts. Other groups saw it as a curse. Humanity had been corrupted, thrown off our natural path. We needed to purify ourselves, to return to our original uncorrupted state. These two perspectives created very different philosophical systems. The first perspective tended toward what we might call left-hand path thinking. Power is good. Advancement is good. We should use every tool and technique available to transcend our limitations. Morality is relative. Results matter more than methods. The second perspective tended toward right-hand path thinking. Harmony is good. Natural development is good. We should be cautious about power and always consider ethical implications. Morality is objective. Methods matter as much as results. Throughout history, individuals and organizations have aligned more with one path or the other. Some pursued power above all else. They studied magic, alchemy, and science as ways to gain control over nature and over other people. They saw themselves as the rightful inheritors of the Watcher's knowledge. Others pursued wisdom and spiritual development. They studied meditation, prayer, and philosophy as ways to perfect their character. They saw themselves as guardians of humanity's better nature. Most people, of course, fell somewhere in the middle, but these extreme poles have always existed, pulling human culture in different directions. In the Renaissance, we see this tension playing out beautifully. Scientists like Copernicus and Galileo pursued knowledge even when religious authorities said it was forbidden. They wanted to understand how the universe really worked, regardless of whether it challenged accepted beliefs. Artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli embedded esoteric symbolism in their work. The Sistine Chapel ceiling is full of hidden meanings. Botticelli's paintings contain references to classical mythology and possibly to secret societies like the Medici Circle. Philosophers like Giordano Bruno pushed ideas so radical that the church burned him at the stake. He suggested the universe was infinite, that other worlds existed, that God was immanent in nature rather than separate from it. These Renaissance thinkers were rediscovering and reinterpreting ancient texts like the Book of Enoch. They were trying to synthesize classical knowledge with Christian doctrine. They were creating new frameworks for understanding humanity's place in the cosmos, and some of them paid a terrible price for this intellectual curiosity. The Church, particularly through the Inquisition, fought hard to control what knowledge was acceptable. They had the Index of Forbidden Books, listing texts that Catholics were not allowed to read. The Book of Enoch, along with many other ancient texts, was on that list. Why? If these texts were just primitive myths, why ban them? Why not let people read them and come to their own conclusions? The Church's position was that these texts could lead people into heresy, into false beliefs that would endanger their immortal souls. From the Church's perspective, they were protecting people. But critics argue the Church was protecting its own power. Texts that offered alternative narratives about human origins, about angels and demons, about the relationship between humans and the divine. These texts threatened the Church's monopoly on religious truth. This is a pattern that repeats throughout history. Those in power want to control the narrative. Alternative stories, alternative explanations, these are always seen as threatening. Even today, we see this. Certain ideas are acceptable for discussion, and others are labeled conspiracy theories. Some questions are encouraged, and others are dismissed. I'm not saying all conspiracy theories are true. Most are nonsense. But the pattern of power trying to control knowledge, that pattern is real and ancient. Your breathing is slow and steady now. Your muscles are relaxed. You're in that pleasant state between waking and sleeping. The story continues, and you can drift with it wherever it takes you. What's your perspective on secret societies? Real power, or just interesting stories? Let me know in the comments. I'm always curious about different viewpoints. Now let's bring this story into more recent times. Chapter 8. The Modern World's Strange Connections. The 20th century changed everything. Technology exploded at an unprecedented rate. In just 100 years, we went from horse-drawn carriages to space travel, from telegraphs to the internet, from hand-cranked phonographs to streaming music services. Why did progress accelerate so dramatically? The standard answer is that each innovation built on previous ones. Once you have electricity, you can invent electric motors. Once you have radio, you can develop television. Each breakthrough enables the next one in an exponential curve. This is mostly true. But some people asked a different question. Did we have help? In the 1940s and 1950s, UFO sightings increased dramatically. The most famous was Roswell in 1947, where something crashed in New Mexico. The official explanation changed several times, first saying it was a flying disc, then claiming it was a weather balloon, later revealing it was part of a secret project to detect Soviet nuclear tests. What really crashed at Roswell? We probably will never know for certain. But the incident sparked decades of speculation about extraterrestrial visitors and government cover-ups. This connects to our larger story in an interesting way. Remember, the Book of Enoch describes non-human intelligences interacting with humanity. Beings from outside our normal existence who brought knowledge and technology. Modern UFO lore describes essentially the same thing. Beings from outside, in this case from other planets rather than other dimensions, who observe humanity and occasionally interact with us. Are these the same phenomenon described in different cultural contexts? Ancient people would have described advanced beings as gods or angels. Modern people describe them as aliens from other planets, different language for the same experience. Or are they completely unrelated? Ancient mythology is mythology. Modern UFO sightings are either genuine encounters with extraterrestrial craft, or they're misidentifications, hoaxes, and psychological phenomena. I'm not going to tell you which answer is right. I find both possibilities fascinating. What's undeniable is that the 20th century saw an explosion of interest in these questions. Books, movies, and TV shows explored themes of ancient astronauts, genetic manipulation, and hidden human potential. Authors like Erich von Däniken wrote bestsellers arguing that ancient structures like the pyramids were built with help from extraterrestrial visitors. Mainstream archaeology dismissed these ideas, but they captured popular imagination. Television shows like The X-Files explored government conspiracies, hiding the truth about alien contact. Movies like The Matrix suggested our entire reality might be a simulation created by advanced intelligences. These are modern versions of very old questions. Who are we really? Where did we come from? Are we alone? What is our true potential? The Book of Enoch addressed these questions in the language and concepts of its time. Modern speculative fiction addresses them in the language of our time. The core questions remain the same. Meanwhile, real science was making genuine breakthroughs that seemed almost as fantastic as science fiction. We discovered DNA in the 1950s and learned how to read genetic code. We found that humans share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We're remarkably similar to other life on Earth at the genetic level, but we also found something strange. Large portions of human DNA, sometimes called junk DNA, didn't seem to code for anything. What was it for? Why did we carry all this apparently useless genetic material? Recent research suggests much of this DNA isn't junk at all. It serves regulatory functions. It controls when other genes turn on and off. It's more like an operating system than like junk. But some researchers ask, could some of this DNA be dormant? Could it contain genetic information that isn't currently expressed, but could activate under certain conditions? Now, I want to be very clear. There is no scientific evidence supporting the literal existence of Nephilim DNA in human genomes. This is not established science. It's speculation. But it's interesting speculation that connects ancient texts to modern biological understanding. We also develop technologies to alter DNA. CRISPR gene editing allows us to precisely modify genetic code. We can, in theory, add new traits or remove unwanted ones. We're becoming capable of directing our own evolution. This raises profound ethical questions. Should we genetically enhance humans? Should we make some people smarter, stronger, longer-lived? If we do, would we be creating a new kind of inequality? A genetic divide between enhanced and natural humans? These are the exact same questions the Book of Enoch wrestles with, just translated into modern scientific language. What happens when some humans are genetically superior to others? What does that do to society, to equality, to human dignity? We're approaching the point where these are not just philosophical questions, but practical ones we'll have to answer. At the same time, we're developing artificial intelligence. We're creating non-human intelligences that may eventually surpass us in many capabilities. What will our relationship with AI be? Will they be tools we control, partners we work with? Or will they become something else entirely, rendering biological humans obsolete? Again, these are modern versions of the ancient Watcher story. What happens when a superior intelligence interacts with a lesser one? How does the lesser one maintain dignity and agency? The Book of Enoch suggests this doesn't go well. The superior intelligence, even with good intentions, tends to dominate and distort the natural development of the lesser one. Are we about to learn this lesson again, but from the other side? Are we about to become the watchers in relation to AI, making choices that seem reasonable but might have catastrophic, unintended consequences? I don't have answers, but I find these parallels fascinating and worth thinking about. Your eyes are so heavy now, you can barely keep them open, and that's perfectly okay. Let them close if they want to. Rest. Dream. The story will be here whether you hear every word or not. How do you think ancient wisdom applies to modern technology? Should we pay attention to old warnings, or are we in completely new territory? Share your thoughts below. Let's talk about signs and symbols around us. Chapter 9. Signs and symbols all around us. Have you ever noticed that certain symbols appear everywhere once you start looking for them? Walk through any major city, look at corporate logos, government buildings, currency, monuments. You'll see the same symbols repeating: pyramids, eyes, stars, triangles, circles within circles. Why do these particular shapes keep appearing? The obvious answer is that simple geometric shapes are naturally appealing. They're easy to reproduce. They're memorable. They look clean and professional in a logo or on a building. But there might be more to it. Symbols carry meaning beyond their surface appearance. They connect to deeper patterns in human consciousness. Carl Jung called these patterns archetypes. They're universal themes and images that appear across all cultures. The circle represents wholeness, completion, cycles. Every culture uses circles symbolically. Wedding rings, medicine wheels, mandalas. The circle appears in nature too: the sun, the moon, the iris of an eye. The triangle represents stability and hierarchy. It's the strongest geometric shape structurally. 3 points define a plane. 3 legs make a stool stable: father, mother, child. Beginning, middle, end. Birth, life, death. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The pyramid is a 3-dimensional triangle. It represents the same hierarchical stability, but with an additional element: the elevated point at the top, the apex, the pinnacle, the one who rises above. Throughout history, ruling classes have used pyramid symbolism to represent social hierarchy. The pharaoh at the top, priests and nobles in the middle, workers and slaves at the bottom. Everyone in their place, creating a stable structure. The eye symbol represents awareness, consciousness, perception. To see is to know. The all-seeing eye represents omniscience, God's awareness, or in a more sinister interpretation, surveillance, someone watching everything you do. When you combine the pyramid and the eye, you get a powerful symbolic message. Consciousness at the pinnacle of the hierarchy. The enlightened few at the top, seeing everything, guiding the unaware masses below. This symbol appears on the American dollar bill, on the Great Seal. It's been there since the founding of the United States. The official explanation is that it represents divine providence watching over the new nation. But some see it differently, as a symbol that the United States was founded by people who understood these esoteric principles. People who saw themselves as enlightened guardians of a new order. The phrase on the seal says, Novus Ordo Seclorum. It's Latin. The official translation is New Order of the Ages, but many people know it as New World Order. Was this intentional? Were the founders signaling their intention to create a new kind of society based on principles known only to initiates? Or are people reading too much into choices that were simply aesthetic and classical? The founders admired Roman Republican ideals. Using Latin phrases and classical imagery was fashionable. Both interpretations might have some truth. Let's look at architecture. Washington, D.C. is full of buildings that mirror ancient temples. The Capitol building has columns and domes like Roman structures. The Washington Monument is an obelisk, an ancient Egyptian symbol. The Lincoln Memorial looks like a Greek temple. Why design a modern Capitol to look like ancient religious structures? The official answer is that it connects American democracy to classical civilization. We're the inheritors of Greek and Roman ideals of republic and law. But there's a deeper symbolic layer. These buildings create sacred space. They elevate government to something more than mundane. They suggest that what happens in these buildings is not just politics, but something approaching religious ritual. Leaders become high priests. Laws become commandments. The nation becomes a kind of religion. This isn't unique to America. Every civilization does this to some degree. But it's interesting to notice and think about. Now let's talk about entertainment and media. Movies and television shows are full of esoteric symbolism. Sometimes it's intentional and meaningful. Sometimes it's just visually interesting. And sometimes filmmakers use these symbols because they've seen them in other films, creating a kind of unconscious tradition. But certain themes appear again and again. The chosen one, the hidden potential within ordinary people, the secret war between good and evil that most people never see. the ancient evil that returns after being thought defeated. These are the same themes as the Book of Enoch, just told in modern settings with modern characters. The Matrix presents reality as a simulation controlled by machines. Humans are trapped in an artificial world, while their real bodies are harvested for energy. A chosen one awakens, sees the truth, and fights to free humanity. This is essentially a Gnostic narrative. Gnosticism was an early Christian movement that taught the material world was created by a false god. True reality exists in a higher spiritual dimension. Humans have divine sparks trapped in material bodies. Awakening to this truth brings liberation. The Book of Enoch influenced Gnostic thinking. The idea that the physical world is corrupted and that humans need special knowledge to escape that corruption. These ideas appear in both texts. Star Wars presents the Force, an energy field connecting all living things. Some people are sensitive to the Force and can use it for good or evil. The Jedi are guardians who train Force-sensitive individuals. This is essentially the Watcher's narrative. Some beings have abilities, others don't. These abilities can be used to help or harm. Training and moral development determine which path one takes. Harry Potter presents a magical world hidden within the ordinary world. Some people are born with magical ability. They're taken from their families as children and trained at special schools. There's a Dark Lord who wants to establish the supremacy of pure-blood wizards over non-magical humans. Again, we see themes of hidden bloodlines, special abilities, and the danger of genetic supremacy. I'm not suggesting these stories are deliberately teaching esoteric doctrine. I'm suggesting that these archetypal patterns run so deep in human consciousness that they appear naturally in our storytelling. We keep returning to these themes because they address real human concerns. Questions about identity, belonging, power, destiny, good and evil. The Book of Enoch is one of the oldest written expressions of these themes. But the themes themselves are even older. They're fundamental to how humans understand ourselves and our place in the universe. Let yourself sink even deeper into relaxation now. Your conscious mind can take a break. Your unconscious can process these ideas in its own way. There's no pressure to remember or understand everything. Do you notice symbols in your daily life? Do they mean anything to you? I'd love to hear your observations in the comments. Now let's conclude with thoughts about human potential. Chapter 10. The truth about human potential. We've traveled together through ancient texts, hidden histories, secret symbols, and modern connections. We've explored questions about human origins, about bloodlines and potential, about power and wisdom. Now let's bring it all together and think about what it means for you, for us, for humanity as a whole. Whether you take the Book of Enoch literally or see it as metaphor, the core message is the same. Humans carry immense potential. We have capabilities we rarely use. We can accomplish things that seem impossible. But this potential comes with responsibility, with danger. The same abilities that can create beauty and progress can also create destruction and suffering. The story of the Watchers and Nephilim is ultimately a warning story. It warns about the dangers of power without wisdom. The Nephilim had abilities far beyond normal humans, but they lacked the emotional and ethical development to use those abilities well. They became tyrants, knowledge without morality. The Watchers taught advanced technology to beings who weren't ready for it. The result was weapons, warfare, and oppression. Superiority without empathy. When one group believes they're fundamentally better than others, they inevitably end up dominating and exploiting those others. Whether that superiority is genetic, intellectual, economic, or spiritual doesn't matter. The pattern is the same. These warnings are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. We live in a time of incredible power. Technology gives us abilities our ancestors would have considered godlike. We can fly through the air. We can communicate instantly across any distance. We can access almost any information in seconds. We can modify DNA. We might soon create conscious AI. Do we have the wisdom to use these powers well? Or are we like the Nephilim, brilliant but ultimately self-destructive? This is the question our generation must answer through our choices. But the ancient texts also contain hope. They suggest that humans in their natural state, without genetic modification or technological enhancement, have something valuable that the superior beings lacked. Humans have adaptability. We can survive almost any environment. We can endure suffering that would break those who have never experienced hardship. Humans have creativity. We imagine things that don't exist and then bring them into being. We create art, music, stories, not for survival, but for joy. Humans have compassion. We care for those who can't help themselves. We sacrifice for our children. We form communities. We create meaning through relationships. These qualities, according to the ancient wisdom, are more valuable than raw power or intelligence. They're what makes us human in the best sense. The Book of Enoch suggests that when the crisis came, when the choice had to be made, it was these human qualities that mattered, not the sophistication of the Nephilim, not the knowledge of the Watchers, but the simple human ability to endure, to hope, to start over. Noah wasn't chosen because he was the most powerful or most intelligent. He was chosen because he was faithful, because he could be trusted, because he had the basic human decencies that others had lost. This is encouraging for those of us who aren't brilliant or powerful. You don't need to be extraordinary to be valuable. You don't need special abilities or secret knowledge. Being a good person, doing the right thing, caring for those around you, these simple things matter more than all the power in the world. At the same time, if you do have special gifts, talents, abilities, you have a choice to make. Will you use them to elevate yourself above others, or will you use them in service of the common good? This choice defines who you are more than the abilities themselves. The story also reminds us that no empire lasts forever. No matter how powerful, how advanced, how dominant a civilization becomes, eventually it falls. The Nephilim seemed invincible, but they're gone now, remembered only in myths and ancient texts. Meanwhile, ordinary humans are still here. We survived, we persisted, we rebuilt. This pattern repeats throughout history. Empires rise and fall, but communities of regular people, helping each other, raising families, passing on traditions, these continue. There's strength in that continuity. There's value in being part of the ongoing human story. Even if you're not a main character, even if your life seems ordinary, your choices matter, your kindness matters, your integrity matters. Not in some grand cosmic sense necessarily, but in the immediate sense of making the world around you slightly better or slightly worse. The Book of Enoch, for all its talk of cosmic battles and genetic experiments, ultimately comes down to this simple message: choose wisely, choose kindness, choose community, choose truth. These choices are available to everyone, regardless of bloodline, regardless of ability, regardless of circumstances. You have the power to choose. That's the most important power of all. As we come to the end of our journey together tonight, I want to thank you for listening. Whether you stayed awake for the whole thing or drifted off into dreams halfway through, I'm grateful you spent this time with me. These ancient stories, these mysteries and questions, they're part of our shared human heritage. We can explore them together, learn from them, debate their meanings, and let them inspire our imaginations. What resonated with you in this story? What made you think? What questions do you still have? Please share in the comments. I read them all, and I love having conversations with this community. If you enjoyed this exploration of ancient mysteries, please consider subscribing. We create content like this regularly, perfect for learning while you relax, or for pondering deep questions. And if you found value in this, maybe share it with someone who might enjoy it too. These stories are meant to be shared, passed on, discussed together. Sleep well tonight. Dream of ancient temples and star-filled skies. Dream of forgotten knowledge waiting to be rediscovered. Dream of your own potential, waiting to be realized. Tomorrow is a new day, a new chapter, a new opportunity to make wise choices and be the kind of person the world needs. Rest now, be at peace, and know that you are part of something much larger than yourself, part of the great ongoing story of humanity, with all its struggles and triumphs, its questions and mysteries. Good night, and thank you for being here.